Woodie Flowers is an icon, not just at Olin, but nationally. I first met Woodie, actually, when I arrived at MIT as a master's student in mechanical engineering in 1972. I don't know if you remember this, but we were in the same building. There's a basement lab where all the graduate students hung out, and Woodie was there. He was completing his PhD at the time, and you were already involved in teaching design, but I don't think you'd taken over leadership of the class yet. Made a huge impression on me that this guy actually engineers stuff. He doesn't talk about it, which was great. When I returned to start Olin in 1999, Woodie's the first faculty member I reached out to. We need help, Woodie. We need to rethink what it means to be an engineer, rethink what it means to be educated. He did not hesitate and came out and spent about a day a week with us for years in mentoring us, which was terrific. Few engineers have ever had a greater impact on the lives of so many young people, not just at MIT, not just in engineering schools, as Woodie Flowers. And one of the things that I've discovered later in life is that he's not just an engineer, he's not just an educator, he's actually a philosopher. And he has a really well thought out understanding in life. He's born in Jena, Louisiana in 1943. He said he was named after his grandfathers, Woodie and Claude. So that's what the WC stands for. As a kid, he showed considerable mechanical aptitude like his father, Abe, who was a welder, a general repairman, and an inventor. He would go around and tell people, I'm going to build that thingamabob, a widget, and put it together to make a new slab kicker, okay? And then go do it. And it did work, too. He's talking about his father. So he did some pretty amazing stuff. The ability to make something new, interesting, and useful out of an old thingamabob is a core of what Woodie Flowers himself has always encouraged his students to do. To see things in new ways, to find new possibilities, and using simple materials. I think my father taught me more engineering than I learned in school, is what Woodie is quoted as saying at one point. He also has been quoted as saying it's a disservice to students to have them work on problems that have known solutions. That's not enough. It's essential that students learn to think creatively and originally and to gain confidence and tackle big challenges. Now, this is an Olin guy, okay? You can see this is what Olin, so we followed you. That's what we're trying to do here. He earned the rank of Eagle Scout as a kid. He's now a distinguished partner at Olin, where he has been for a long time, and also a member of our President's Council. He's the Pappalardo Professor of Mechanical Engineering Emeritus at MIT, a member of the National Academy of Engineering and the AAAS. He also has a Doctor Honoris Causa from Chilean University, Universidad Nacional Andrés Bello. At MIT, he created the famous course 2007, Intro to Design and Manufacturing in 1974. Design competition to build robotic mechanisms to accomplish a given challenge. That was the idea. Became one of the most popular courses at MIT. The competition was televised several years on PBS show Discover the World of Science. It became a sporting event. In fact, MIT often recurs to this as its true homecoming game. It's really an exciting thing. You have to see it at MIT to really understand it. And of course, this is Woodie's vision incarnated. In 1990, this show became the PBS series Scientific American Frontiers, where Woodie Flowers served as his host until 1993, when I guess he got tired of it, so he handed off that role to Alan Alda, the TV actor, and it continued after that. So he got it launched. In 1990, he joined Dean Kamen on a project to inspire a culture that celebrates science and technology among the youth of America. They created First Robotics, the first robotics competition, FRC, that's now worldwide. They did that in 1992, massive global competition that's touched millions of lives now. I don't even know how many, it's 40,000, 50,000, I don't know how many students now compete in the finals all over the world. Woodie's continued to play his leadership role in that institution. He introduced the concept, and this is one of the reasons why I thought he was just the right person to speak to us today, the concept of gracious professionalism. And I'm sure he'll touch on that in his talk. This has now pervaded first culture and many others. It's an observation that that mindset matters, that kids are learning more than how to connect wires and put on bolts. It's the behavior that they have with others that matters. Now, a visit to Woodie's MIT office is a little bit like visiting an engineering museum. I absolutely love it when you go there. He's got stuff all over the place, but I didn't know until recently there's a reason why he puts this stuff out. He's actually doing sociological experiments on you when you walk in. He's noted that people who ignore this stuff and just can keep talking like they're in an academic library are not usually engineers. But the people who are attracted to stuff and can't help but pick it up and play with it and try to figure out what it does, those are people he's really interested in. And he will wind up spending a lot of time with you, and in fact, he'll wind up being a mentor. Now, when I first met Woodie, and you probably don't even remember this, and I hope that I'm not making this up, but I remember it very clear. He told me that when he moved to MIT from Louisiana, it was not a normal thing to do for kids who grew up where he was. It was a big leap. He had to move to a place that's well known for science and engineering. And of course, with his background and his close feeling with his father, he had different goals in life. He told me that at one point, when he was very young, his primary goal was to someday own a red Corvette. So I'm not making that up, right? And so we thought we would finally fulfill his dream. And I have actually a small gift for you, Woodie, if you'd come up. This is a 1963. It should be about the right time. Thank you. Welcome to Olin College. I hope you won't forget us.
It's really nice to be here. There's not as many students as I thought might be here. So how many people have been to a FIRST event? We have former chairman of the board of FIRST and some FIRST alumni. So I was asked to talk about the history of robotics competitions and talk about mindset and the future of what I call true education. And it's in air quotes just to keep me from sounding entirely too arrogant, but I do have some feelings about true education being different than what we are doing now. So please bear with me because I have a whole array of things to talk about, and they don't necessarily fit together yet well in the argument. They fit together well in my head, but give me some slack. So about history. Now, the history, I have started scanning slides. I have thousands. 35 millimeter slides. I've learned that photography's come a long way, that back when these pictures were taken, the photographer had to focus. And when you start scanning, you discover they weren't quite in focus. So the graphics are a little rough. I need to say thank you to people like Bob Mann, who was my doctoral supervisor. He was responsible for bringing design back into university education in engineering. I mean, that's not solely, but he had a very large influence on making that happen around the world. And Neil Pappalardo, as in Pappalardo Professor Emeritus, Neil and his family got interested in doing experience-based hands-on education, and he came back to MIT and went to the 270 contest and ended up being the chairman of the corporation at MIT and has been an incredible supporter for everything in mechanical engineering and at MIT. Tiny was the curmudgeon, apparently, that was the foreman of the mechanical engineering shop. And Tiny had a lot of power in mechanical engineering. He was there for a very long time. He seemed like a gruff guy, but he was a teddy bear. And over the years, without his support, none of the stuff that we were able to do could have been done. Now, when I started doing these slides, I was really embarrassed because I came across all these 35 millimeter slides that you use a program like Persuasion, and you'd you had fonts and you had colors and you could do all this trashy looking stuff. And then take your floppy disk down to the studio and maybe next couple of days you'd get the slides back. But there was evidence of the trail in some of the slides, and I just begun, haven't done them all, but I still firmly believe that informed creative thinking, all three, all the time, are absolutely quintessential part of what young people need to learn how to do. And I was stunned that when I started talking to audiences about designing creative design exercises, that there wasn't a consensus about how one does that. For example, I think they need to be new. Need to be new to the instructor as well as the student, because you're working with, not projecting to. To be possible. You know, I'd go give a talk at an ASCE conference and somebody would come up and say, yeah, I had this really impossible consulting job. I couldn't figure out what to do, so I decided to give it to my students as a creative exercise. You feel like punching somebody in the face for saying that. Why would you take somebody's creative ego and say, try to do this and learn about yourself as a creative person? And it may not be possible, I couldn't do it, but see what, it's terrible, irresponsible. So we also learned about ambivalent scaling. You know, if you're designing a competition and you want it to be done in many ways, you want gradations of success, you don't want failed, succeeded, then it has to be possible in many ways. And that's one of the toughest things that you do. And in FIRST now, it's very clear that one of the toughest things to do is make sure that it's interesting to the veterans, but accessible to the rookies. Ambivalent scaling is one of the ways you do that. And one of the things that we don't do in many things, but still happens at MIT, is I think you learn about yourself most effectively if, at first, you have the luxury of working alone. You get to make all the decisions yourself. Dealing with other people is really complex. And a naive designer on a new problem in a new team, man, the deck is stacked pretty heavily against you. The other thing is that, you know, back then, I didn't call it epistemology, but, you know, learning that nature behaves in a causal, predictable way is a big deal. And I think it's a good foundation for learning to think critically, and I'll say more about that. I used to rant about in the Boston area, a multi-billion-dollar engineering feat, the new tunnel under the harbor, was named after somebody who could hit a rock with a stick. You know, come on. That was a Neanderthal thing. We probably should have named it after many of the people that won Nobel Prizes in this area, et cetera. So, the kind of early foundations to what became gracious professionalism was charging the students, you know, you're building this thing, but it'll be more interesting if you compete like crazy, but treat each other nicely in the process. And they also took great pride in teaching one another everything that they were learning. So that became gracious professionalism, and it has stood for a while. Now, the first competition was an IAP activity, an independent of class thing. It was a rubber band powered string climber, which was really tough job. And then we had some contests that were basic kits. This one was a potentially great race. You know, the machine went down the track and came back based only on the change in altitude of the center of gravity. All the machines kind of looked alike, but we were beginning to learn about some of the things you could do. Soon after that, there was a thing called can test, which are, you know, a 20-foot long beam, and machines came from both ends. And this was the finale, when the two machines had collided right in the middle, and one of the cans dented the other one, and that was the difference, and that was, you know, the winner. And the winner was Brian Hughes. Now, I acknowledge Brian because the other group of people that get credit for what happened are the students. I was so unbelievably lucky to have this amazing group of people that I was working with to do this stuff. So Brian went on to put up satellites and put cables under the ocean and become a member of the MIT Corporation and our visiting committee, et cetera. And he beat David Abrams. And David started a bunch of electronics companies, ended up coming back, getting a degree from Harvard Law School, becoming a digital rights patent attorney, and is doing lots of other interesting things. So it's just incredible group of students. And we got to the point where we were using motors, and we were using Polaroid motors that were very high-speed, small torque things, and when we first started doing that, we discovered that one of the students had taken this 5,000 RPM motor apart and redone the magnetic circuit and cut the armature resistance down, and it was now 15,000 RPM. So they went at it with the physics. And there were always the kind of the trivial prizes, trophies that were not meant to be anything other than not an overt celebration of winning. But Carl Ulrich was faculty at Sloan School, faculty at Wharton now. We had an electronic tie. There was a 20-foot beam, and you were to get your machine out so that you tipped the beam in your favor. The guy that did the tiebreaker, the indicator, didn't realize you could get a neutral, but we did. Must have been about a millisecond of timing. And gracious professionalism prevailed. Students gave each other hugs, handshakes. The right tradition was underway. In 1976, we had the Sandbox Derby, a rubber band-powered tug-of-war in a tray of sand. To date things, this was official MIT ashtray sand. We don't have that anymore. Not only because of silicosis, but so there was also a lesson in these competitions lasted about 30 milliseconds. Whoa! It would be over and you'd see who had won. But the students expressed their creativity. Isaacs was a crew jock, so his machine looked like a crew shell. Sue Caton won. I still communicate with Sue from time to time. There was a wonderful 16 millimeter documentary film made about that competition that year by Steve Asher and Buster Cram. And the most difficult thing that they had to do was clean up Sue's language that she used in the shop when she was building. to show it to MIT alumni, it was kind of tough, because that was back in the 70s, it was a different world. But Sue is in the lower left, and Bogdan Dewodowicz is there with his hands up like that, and that was the round that did it. We had competitions in water. This was a flying machine that came off of its end of the field, flew through the air and grabbed the thing in the middle, but we had ambivalent scale so that some machines floated, some machines walked on the bottom, some flew through the air. So that's a success, and we had to be prepared. The names for the contest were always kind of silly puns. This was MIT Rat Race, and each of the machines had a lanyard, a rubber lanyard that had a replica of the MIT brass rat, the MIT graduation ring, and they were carrying that ring forward in a side-by-side tug-of-war. They were interesting. It was in a tray of plastic pellets that was made navigation and traction interesting, to say the least. Lots of interesting failures. But very soon, that became a big thing at MIT, the biggest classroom. We had one time when the Cambridge Fire Department came in and said, you have fire code violation, you got too many people in the room. We had to make some people leave. It's a nice problem to have. This was a thing of the mountain, a sand-covered mountain, getting to the top, claiming as much of it as possible. Machines, this looks like a fairly crude thing. The kits were still fairly crude. Making something that would go fast enough to fly over the top of the mountain with a simple part from a Polaroid camera and some basic materials is a very sophisticated thing to do. So the kids were doing amazing stuff, and they were happy about what they'd done. Summit meeting was a political statement at the time, but this was, get your ping pong ball higher at the top of the mountain than anyone else. And there were some really amazing, that lazy tongs thing in the front there, that's a real accomplishment. And the telescoping thing, that's hard to do with basic kit materials. And every once in a while there was one that needed some Viagra or something that was a little less than spectacular. Placebos became a big thing. Part of the spirit of what we were doing is, if you didn't want to compete, you could make something that was purposefully done, and your instructor would celebrate that. So you weren't necessarily trying to win, you're trying to learn something. And students would come back and say, we want to make the placebo for the dead ends in the tournament so that you could compete against something. And those things got more and more elaborate until they became kind of dangerous, and we had to back off on that. This was a mounting tension, a tug-of-war on a sheet of aluminum with kickers on the end. And Reggie was the runner-up that year. He later became a member of the department's visiting committee. But there's always a great deal of enthusiasm, a lot of proper attitude among the students. And the harvest was a really good competition. I'll come back and talk about somebody that are into this. Was Discover the World of Science.
Jenny meets the Deathmobile in round 3.
Set, go.
It's an even match, fast cart versus fast cart. And there's a control problem for Jenny. She can't work loose from the stakes that Woodie Flowers put in just to make things a little more difficult. The perfectly controlled Deathmobile walks away with it.
It had potential, and I've worked on it for tons of 6 weeks, 7 weeks, and I'm really mad at myself because I can't steer.
She got hung up on the post, and I didn't, so I won. And I guess it was luck.
Benji, through to round 4, immediately has trouble spreading his rakes with the delicate winding system. The opposition makes it worse, and it's all over.
I stuffed my rakes around back into my machine, and it all got tangled up. And once that happened, I was dead.
It's no surprise when 2 carts make it to the finals. Brad Waller's Deathmobile against David Cultus's Love Tractor.
Down! Down!
The Love Tractor gets a good first scoop and then pins down the Deathmobile. It could be all over. But the joystick artist breaks out and begins to catch up, fast. And the Love Tractor reveals a crucial flaw. If it jumps out of alignment, the non-steerable design is helpless. It's so close they need a ball count. It's Brad Waller. By 87 to 75, he is the champion engineer.
The students were fantastic, as usual. A lot of diversity. They were exciting, and I think they were good sports, and they learned a lot. We had lots of winners tonight.
You learn so much about just how to design things. I mean, I know what a 632 screw is exactly now. I mean, you know everything. And you just sort of learn all that kind of stuff that's going to be awesome for when we're real engineers in the field. And we'll know, what's going on. The class is valuable, and the contest is for fun. Yeah, that's how you have to take it.
I think it's probably the best class I've ever taken at MIT, and I've learned so much from it. It makes me want to be an engineer now.
Now, Jenny became a product designer, and I've seen her periodically. She's done really wonderful stuff. I repeat that the students that I had the fortunate opportunity to work with are amazing. Benji and his brother Michael both ended up working for Dean at DECA and had incredibly responsible positions. Benji ended up being the world head referee for FIRST for many years because he's just an incredible rock solid guy. Megan is Megan Smith, whose most recent job was Chief Technology Officer of the United States, reporting directly to Obama. And Megan is another wonderful rock star that passed through the course. So, 1990-ish, I met Dean. It was time to move on, to get into a much different theater. This year we had 2 championships, one in Houston, one in St. Louis. Over 60,000 people attend. They're big celebrations. It's a fair deal. We give the students this incredibly difficult problem. They work their tail off, doing it and learning, etc. You owe them a celebration that justifies, that is appropriate for what they've done.
The victory, this play, this game, it's so awesome. I can't believe we won it. It's everything I've worked for the past 6 weeks. I've stayed up late day after day, and it all is coming together now. I'm overwhelmed. It's so amazing.
how much power and how much passion there is, and just how excited we all are, and just don't give up. Just keep pursuing your passion, whether in STEM, in business, whatever you contribute to your team. It's amazing. First has completely changed my life. I didn't want to go into engineering, and now I do, and I know absolutely that this is what I want to do with my life, and it's so amazing to be part of First.
Now, First has grown the numbers. You can go look at the website. There's a lot of data, a lot of good data, has a really big impact in lots of different situations. The youngest kids now are in First Lego League Junior.
So we invented a device that can help people turn pages in a book.
Well, this is wonderful. So how did you guys figure this out?
I had a brainstorming session. Yeah.
You had a brainstorming session?
Yeah.
Are you guys able to slow it down and speed it up? No. So that would require sort of a little bit of an adjustment.
It's a prototype.
It's a prototype.
Yeah.
It's a prototype. Thank you so much, guys. Good job. Group hug. Group hug.
Now, come on, when you have kindergarten girls talking about brainstorming sessions and prototypes, yes! Major victory. First Lego League is the biggest of the programs. It's huge, and it's in 85 countries. A lot of excitement. The First Tech Challenge are kind of this size robots, accessible to a different group of people, generating a lot of excitement. So yes, it's about high-tech robots, and I'll come back with a better illustration of that. But there's more, as they say on television. Gracious professionalism is the underpinning of the ethos of First. Because in each of the programs, the highest award is for the most exemplary relationship with community. It's not just about the technology, it's about thinking about how you fit. So it's team-based, very hard problems, and requires a lot of initiative. It doesn't just get handed to people. In most cases, the kids have to go raise money to buy stuff to participate for travel, et cetera. It's not an inexpensive thing to do, especially if you win big and get to go to a world championship. So it is clearly post-STEM, or uber STEM, or over the horizon STEM, or whatever. I celebrate that we started focusing on STEM, but STEM is nowhere near enough. STEM is necessary but not sufficient. So part of First is specifically designed to make sure that human behavior is part of it. So in a tournament where 40 teams showed up for the big robots, in the first day and a half, the teams compete in random alliances of 3. And then those go back into the next group 3 comes up. At the end of a day and a half, the top 8 seeds take the field and they draft to create the alliances that will go through the finals. So number 1 seed picks their first choice, and then the others down to number 8, and then number 8 seed picks their 2 choices and goes back up to the top. It is very clear that draft process celebrates people that are honest about what their team does and what their machine will do. They're easy to work with, they listen. It is a celebration of a behavior model that's really important. So when you have a title that's Emeritus, you get to back off and look from a higher altitude. So one of the reasons that I am concerned is that we adults have created a world that's changing faster than we're willing to accept. It's just simply true. I mean, we're just dragging our feet saying, stop, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, I don't want to think about it. So in this country, for example, we're second from the bottom from the developed countries with regard to the percentage of the population that accepts evolution. There is a strong anti-science bias. It's really clear, there's a lot of versions of this data, but this is a good set of data that points out that routine manual and cognitive work is flat or down. If you're doing non-routine manual stuff, yeah, it's growing a bit, but the real payoff is non-routine cognitive stuff. And that's what true education is about to me. Now, a lot of people are writing about the changes that are underway. Colleagues at Sloan School have made a lot of noise with the second machine age, and Andrew McAfee has giving lots of speeches and talking about it. This was an interview last week in the Chronicle of Higher Education, points out that we need to adapt to the new future. It was a delightful article to me in New York Times Magazine back in mid-December, The Great AI Awakening. It was a narrative, nice read, 2 stories. One was about the big neural network simulation that Google Brain guys went and dumped on the lap of the Google Translate guys. The observation was you've got this beautifully translated English, Japanese, Japanese, English set of data. So why don't we let this neural network work on it? I don't know. We've been working on this for 20 years. I don't know. We might mess things up. Overnight, it got better than humans had been able to do in 20 years. Big deal. The other thing that's covered in this article is the famous cat paper, where the neural network is exposed to millions of images of cats from the web. It came back, not only it had an image of cat. So not only did it program itself to figure out what to do with these images, it figured out what the problem was. There's some big wake-up calls in that. And I just listened to part of Eric Schmidt's presentation at MIT recently, and he says that progress is being made on inverting the AI problem. You know, if an AI system figures it out, how do you ask it, how did you do that? And if we get to that, that's another big holy grail thing. So interesting stuff happening. On the other hand, this was a wonderful summary article that was in the New Yorker magazine. And I hear things like this through my own confirmation bias filter. So this is an article that points out that we all know our fast brain is running all the stuff that we're doing all the time. We also know that evolution rewarded tribalism. So tribalism said, you know, what you really want to do to preserve your DNA future is to agree with those around you because they won't kill you, or you'll get along with them and your tribe will win. On the other hand, if you base your truth on some abstract thing like truth, you may not be rewarded, so that may not get your DNA to progress. We are wired to have our fast brain do things to keep us from confronting others. That's really scary stuff. We need to be thinking about that now. And one of the ones that just drives me nuts lately is we adults have decided that truth doesn't matter. Come on. I mean, freedom, liberty, pursuit of happiness, not so much if you can't get at truth. So the 0th order thing for young people to do is study enough epistemology so that they have some model of how they think about finding truth. Because they're swamped. There's an attack on science right now that's an anti-truth thing. And I know that science is not perfect. I don't want to get in that debate, but it's really good. I mean, we've sent things into space that found a comet and launched the thing down on. I mean, you know how accurate you have to be to make something like that happen? It's not a rumor. We've understood the laws of nature pretty well. So, and we're being asked, this is Kelly Alternative Facts Conway trying to convince Anderson Cooper that the reason the president fired the director of the FBI was because he had mishandled Hillary Clinton's emails. What? I mean, did somebody actually get in a room and say, let's tell them this? Yeah, they'll believe that. No. So, the other big thing that's in our soup is the wealth divide. And this is one set of data. There's many variations on this out there, but this says that if your parents are rich, you'll be rich. If your parents are poor, you'll be poor. And it's not one-to-one, but there's a very powerful bias in this data. The other thing that's quite obvious is that in order to stay ahead, you have to keep learning your whole life. Rick introduced a bunch of us to Thomas Friedman last year, and I spent a couple of hours talking to him about this model of education and stuff. And this was the day before yesterday. It essentially says that you better learn to learn and do a good job of it, else you're not going to be in the game. Taking charge of your own continued education. Brendan Bustede points out wonderfully that the most common phrase in university mission statements is continuing education. But he then goes on to say, but nobody does anything about it. We got to fix that. And Margaret and I really enjoyed Mindset. I kept saying, yeah, in reading the book, and I'm sure most of you have read it. It's good. So I believe that education and training are different, that training will be outsourced to machines, and that education must be rebalanced and redistributed. And one of the things that we can do is make room. If you get training out of the way, you have room in schools for doing real education. Now, this slide's about 10 years old, and I've been arguing about this for a long time. Obviously, FIRST is all about mentoring. I think good universities are all about mentoring. 20 years ago, or 19 years ago, I wrote a book chapter called New Media's Impact on Education Strategies. I stand by that book chapter. It's an easy read. It has in it, for example, I was talking to Joe about his wife's work with a system where you look at how students are learning with digital media and you update it and it gets better. That's in that chapter explicitly, pointed out. The thing that I said that I was very naive about was that by 2010, we would have a Nobel Prize in education. Well, I blew that. There's a TED Talk, TEDx talk. You do my name and education for the 21st century. You can listen to 15 minutes of that. I've written several op-ed pieces for the faculty newsletter at MIT, and I apologize for doing this to you, but I'd like to read this to you. As we make the transition to digitally enhanced learning and machine-assisted professions, I believe uniquely human will be a powerful differentiator. Professionals who understand the laws of the universe and also have an empathetic response to others will be the leaders. Those who think science is a la carte will have aspirations that Mother Nature will not tolerate. So I really believe that. And the big sort is beginning to happen. We're parsing things. Online degrees are cropping up, some good, some not, I think. MITx and edX are aimed in a different direction than they were when they first started, I think. I think they're moving in the right direction. That chapter that I wrote 19 years ago was part of my losing the debate about what MIT OpenCourseware should be. I was opposed to it being what it became. I think it made a very important contribution, but I think we could have aimed that $40 million in another way and made a much more aggressive contribution, and we're getting closer to that stuff now, I think. And by the way, Ed Crowley is here. Ed is part of a new effort called NEAT, New Engineering Education Transformation. And I think that's evidence that we're making some moves in the right direction. I attended the signing ceremony for JWEL 2 weeks ago. That's Jamal World Education Lab, an effort to drag people out of poverty through education in parts of the world, a new $50 million kickoff. The MITILI, M-I-T-I-L-I, Integrated Learning Initiative. That's being run by John Gabriele, who is a brain and cognitive science guy. So we're pushing in the right direction. MicroMasters was a professional certification one-year program at MIT. It was all residential. The guys looked at it and said, well, you know, half that's training and half of it's education, so we'll do the training online, make it free to everybody. The people that do really well, as in the best 30 people in the world, we will admit them to the second half, which is residential. I think that's a sort that's going to happen. We're going to say, we can't afford to use human-to-human contact for training, so we're going to let machines do that, distance learning, et cetera. We're going to save the human-to-human expensive stuff for residential programs. Purdue is being aggressive. They just bought Kaplan. And as you might expect, the faculty's in an uproar. How that's going to sort out, I have no idea, but it's very clear that big shifts are underway in university education stuff. To me, it seems really clear that AI tutors are going to replace humans. We have this wonderful warm, fuzzy model of what a human tutor is, helping, doing nice stuff. Look out. Another thing is coming, and that old model, I think, is going to fade. And this is, we know that Alexa can turn on the lights and do all these interesting things, 2 days ago, Echo Show was announced. And that's even more likely to be the tutor that helps in homework that, and can you imagine what it's going to be like when that AI system knows who Woody is and knows that he is dyslexic and doesn't like to pay attention to equations and knows he has to be poked and has a learning model, et cetera. I think we're going to make some progress. The other thing we have to look out for is that politicians and to some extent economists and company CEOs want job training. Well, okay, I understand that, but there's got to be more to it than that. The horizon's further out than 6 months. Because kids that are in school now, by mid-career, I believe, are going to struggle to make sure they can still do things machines cannot yet do. I think that's really a big deal. See, what is uniquely human is becoming a much narrower subset of what we get rewarded by society for doing. And if you can't make a contribution, it's hard to think you'll get satisfaction and therefore have a good shot at a meaningful life. The other thing that's really spooky to me is that the kids that are in school now, not only, the kids at Olin and MIT are going to be in the educated elite, they're going to do just fine. But in order to make the whole thing work, they have to pull with them a whole bunch of others without embarrassing them, without making them angry, without frustrating them. And that is an incredibly complex thing for humans to do. So a big bite. Because it's too much. Last week, Forbes is saying, yeah, you professionals, you put AI and robots out there and it put all these blue-collar workers out of business. Well, they're coming to get you now. I think it's the wrong attitude. I think we have to work together to figure out a way to create a society where there can be a contribution by as many people as possible, but frankly, I think it's complicated. One of the things that, Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is one of my favorite books ever because he taught me a bunch of stuff I didn't know. And we have operated, this last election was an election that was based on fear. The fast brain is really hypersensitive to fear. We need to get past that so we can use some other parts of our brain. So I think some of the things are we need to be attuned to facts. We need to be able to make fact-based decisions. We need to be data-based. Think about how often you see a graph or a spreadsheet in a political campaign. We don't do that. Being in touch with feelings. Societies get the best of what they celebrate. I think first is unambiguous evidence that if you give even raging hormone teenagers an opportunity to feel good about making a contribution to society, helping others, they like it. They get a little squirt of emotional endorphins. They rebuild their self-image in a way that sticks. Fairness is a complicated thing. It doesn't mean that everybody gets the same. It means something, though, I think, about opportunity. Starting to think about that early is really important. In fact, Seymour Papert was right. We need to start early thinking about thinking, being aware of our own mental processes. Some form of metacognition is really essential. And not only just learning, you want to know something about the science of learning. At least read Make It Stick or an equivalent book. Take advantage of the fact that we are beginning to peel open the onion and understand how to make things stick in your own brain. Mid-career, people that are in school now will be able to understand more about their brain. Is that going to be cool? Now think about how much of an advantage it'll be if you understand your brain over people that don't. And there's a whole bunch of the population now who didn't want to think about thinking, much less think about how their own brain works. So in a rapidly changing world, I think it's going to be absolutely essential that you make sure you can still do things machines cannot yet do. And that has direct implications about what I think about as real education. We still have the, well, they got to know this stuff model. Maybe, I think rational self-esteem is the good kind of self-esteem. That's the kind of self-esteem that you have because you know from personal experience that you can do something. Not because somebody gave you a grade, but because you've done it and you know you can do it again, or you can try hard again. So, and I think that's very closely related to Kerouac's growth mindset. I'm prepared to tackle this. So imagine that we're trying to get people to have a self-image that allows them to know from personal experience that they can do something that's really hard. They can do something that's creative, new, own time, with others, for others, lead as needed. I don't think we want to train leaders. I think that's an oxymoron. But I think giving people experience that allows them to know that, in this particular circumstance, I think I can really help, so I will step up and try to guide this. Doing something unpopular if it's right. You can't know that you want to do that again unless you have some experience. I think everyone, at least one time in their life, should make something that's beautiful. And people like me have to cycle through a lot. But finally, you get something that you really like. Ethical complexity is all over us. It's in our soup big time. Having some experience sorting out ethical complexity, which is, according to Carolyn Whitbeck, a design problem, which I absolutely agree with. First, you have to learn what the situation, the truth is, and then pick a path which minimizes damage. But I think that students should make their own list, and we need to help them make their own list. What is it that you want to know about yourself so that you can do what you want to do? And that's part of what I call true education. Because this stuff about being uniquely human is going to become even more important. Now, when I joined the faculty at MIT, Asher Shapiro was being a nice man, the department head. He said, "Welcome to the faculty, Woody, but since you're in design, you have almost no chance of getting tenure." Thank you. And he's making the point that designing and building stuff was not regarded as an intellectually sophisticated activity, but writing about that or deriving equations about that were the Holy Grail. So I believe that in this process of going from ideas to, let's call it a thing for the moment, you go through these loops. You know that you start over and you back up, and at the beginning you have a big trash can that you fill up, and by the time you get to the end, it's not quite so much culling going on. Dave Wallace, who teaches our senior design course now, says you go from wide and shallow to narrow and deep in this process. Now the point is that good designers run back and forth along that spectrum with incredible fluidity. And they always know where they are. And they always use the kind of thinking that's appropriate for there. And I argue that that is a profoundly good way to learn about critical thinking. Because in that spectrum, for example, you may be trying to convince your team at one point, which is all diffuse, not rational causal. Another, you're deriving an equation to decide what the gear ratio ought to be. That's nice and clean, different kind of epistemology. So I think design is a great model for learning critical thinking, and I think that a poet that understands the universe is a better poet. I think everybody wins if they understand the universe. So it took us more years to learn this than I expected, but in the senior design course in particular, where there are teams of 20, you learn very quickly that a very persuasive person with bad ideas is terrible. It's scary because as an instructor, you may recognize that's a terrible idea, but you don't go in and intervene and say, don't listen to this person. So you have to let that play out in some way. And you learn, the participants in the team learn that being persuasive does not make you right, and being right does not make you persuasive. So some of the trade-off space for being a part of that group is there in spades. So I think for a lot of reasons, making is a very high-level intellectual activity. Designing and making is a very high-level intellectual activity. And the counterpoint is that we default the other way too much. We think that an equation explains, when in fact, it only explains if you already understand the phenomenon. And so many faculty said, well, they should understand it. I derived the equation for them. That's different. That's not an explanation. So making with purpose is really important, I think. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for doing this. The chaos monkeys, as some people call it, have started scrambling all the major industries. And kids now are going to walk into a very different world. And they're going to have to be fleet of foot to make wise decisions. So my optimism is based on the kids in the future. I've said to the first community that in a space that's on the vertical axis, things to people, on the horizontal axis, facts to opinions, the facts, things space is pretty nice because that's where the laws of the universe live. That's where the robot behavior is determined. We're pretty good at that. The people, facts, things is really getting to be interesting because we're learning about our own thinking. We're learning about how we learn. And that's getting better and more interesting. In the people opinion stuff, things are more complex. That's a really fuzzy, hairy quadrant to be in. That's where aesthetics and beauty and empathy and a whole bunch of other things exist. And really, really important, but not so easy to define as the stuff in the other quadrant. And the opinions about people is where some people think their opinion affects physics. And if alternative facts could exist, that's where they would be. I celebrate students kind of staying out of that corner. I think they're doing a pretty darn good job in showing in these competitions that they can understand the laws of nature and make robots that really work. They're learning about their ability to think and learn. Through the ethos of FIRST in particular and gracious professionalism and the stuff at MIT, they're celebrating some of the human stuff that we do. So to some extent they're learning about nature, they're learning about themselves, and they're learning about humanity. And it's reasonable, I think, to say that they're taking truth and knowledge and morphing it into wisdom. And that's good. In the language of FIRST, they're becoming gracious professionals, and that's the reason I love them. So Dean and I have an ongoing argument that's convenient for both of us that, yeah, it's about inspiration, no, it's about education. It's okay, it's about inspired education. We both win. But I think it's an important archetype for some of the things we need to know how to do. So let me close by saying gracious professionalism, two words that happen to be nice bedfellows because one of them has to do with your response to others and the other has to do with understanding the universe and doing things that are accurate. In the competition this year, as in every year for the big robots in particular, we had some really amazing machines. Now, the first staff after two back-to-back world competitions was exhausted, and I didn't feel that I could insist on getting a videotape of one of the most amazing competition finales that we've ever had. But I can show you one of the preseason demos that a team published to try to intimidate everybody else. So this was the Robonauts teasing the world with what their machine could do.
Keep
And those guys are good. But that's not the most impressive thing. When you do the gracious emphasis, here's the Chairman's Award video by one of the World Championship winners, the Mars team.
What you see before you are the mountains of West Virginia. Beautiful and truly astounding when seen from here. But what would you see if you looked closer? This is Morgantown, in north central West Virginia, the home of Mountaineer Area Robotics. Each year on the WVU campus, Mars designs and constructs a robot named Marvin. But building a robot is only a single step towards our goal, to foster change in our home, West Virginia. This mission, to inspire students in rural areas to pursue their creative and intellectual passions through programs like FIRST Robotics, seemed impossible just 10 years ago, but now we have a solution. We call this solution the Mars Plan. The first step in this plan is engaging communities around us through visibility. Using this engagement as a springboard, we inspire the creation of robotics programs utilizing experience and financial support gained by Mars over the past decade. We then focus on team sustainability by working closely with coaches and students, mentoring and supporting area teams. In addition to our assistance prior to competition, we ensure events are well run by volunteering as referees, event coordinators, and judges. This support keeps teams coming back, and in the past 10 years, we have more than quadrupled the number of FLL teams within West Virginia. This inherent sustainability and coordination inspires students to continue to participate in higher-level robotics programs. To support this transfer of students, we are now expanding West Virginia's FTC, VEX Robotics, and FRC programs through efforts such as running the FTC State Championship and our FRC off-season event, West Virginia Robotics Extreme, the world's only 26-hour robotics endurance event. Mars expects to see tremendous growth within these programs in the coming years, mirroring our efforts with FLL, which we continue to expand. Mars is now working with the West Virginia School for the Deaf and Blind, West Virginia institutional programs, and within county school curriculum to grow the reach of the statewide robotics program to as many students as possible. Outside of our state, Mars also runs programs such as the Mars Tucker Team Help Desk, a program that allows other FRC teams to receive assistance in mechanical, electrical, and software areas, inside and outside of competitive spaces. Mars is now expanding this program to a national level, training other teams to run their own help desks across the country. For 10 years, Mars has strived to become a driving force for STEM education in West Virginia. The Mars Plan is working. The state of West Virginia is changing, and we will never let it stop. We are part of a revolution. We are Mars.
Cool. So, I hang on to optimism about young people, and I thank you for your attention.
We have time for some questions.
I had a question for you. So you talked in your presentation about having to get into the specific and stay sort of on the front lines and the lower level of figuring things out, and also then moving back and forth from being in a more visionary, looking down, strategic perspective, and you need to know where you are, if I'm describing this well, between the two areas. How do you do that personally? I mean, how do you know when you're in one or the other space? How do you get those two spaces? And
it's a wonderful question.
That work out.
If you are a good designer and thinking about education, how do you know where in the spectrum you are? And I don't know, but I think I run back and forth a lot. I enjoy working one-on-one with somebody, learning about the design process for making a widget, a thing that's just right, micro creativity stuff. But I also enjoy sparring with John Abele about the philosophy for design, and I probably don't do a really good job of keeping those sorted, but I know some designers that are really good at that. And Ernesto Blanco, one of he passed away recently, his image was in some of those slides. He used to say, wishful thinking is a designer's worst enemy. It was his way of saying that when you get near the end, you better stop fantasizing, you better anchor it. So I am fantasizing at the high end, I think. But I also think we have some good evidence that some concrete things that can be done are really effective on the low end. I have this amazing opportunity to go around to these things and have parents come up to me with tears in their eyes. Excuse me. So that's good stuff. Other questions?
So here at Olin, when we talk about design, we often think of it in the context of sort of human-centered design, where you're going out to some group of people and figuring out what they need and then working sort of blue sky down to figure out how to get there. And I feel like as you were talking about design, you have a broader picture than that. You have other contexts in which 2007 isn't really human-centered design, but it's still some interesting intellectual pursuit. And I'm curious what you see as the sort of characteristics of a design task that give it the intellectual stimulation and sort of what that make it an interesting design task and make this type of approach a valuable one.
So I think that, for example, our Congress people are designers but don't know it, because they're trying to design legal structures that end up causing behaviors, but they don't think of it that way. So I'm a design bigot in that I look at the world and see it as all design problems. And I have tremendous respect for what Ben Linder and colleagues here have done with regard to focusing on human-centered design, because we engineers don't naturally do that. We want to make something for us, not for the user. And the lessons to be learned from that are really very real. So I think design, the process is plastic enough to fit many models for what you want to get done. I really envy Stanford because they did this really clever thing. They put out the design thinking meme and it caught on everywhere. It's the way you teach business and all these things now. I think that's great, and I think we're all learning to be designers. You're designing your life, and you're doing some loops, and you're starting over and backing up, and it's an ongoing process. So,
thanks, Woody. I can feel in the classrooms that we're in and in the experiences that we're creating for students that the classroom itself is coming apart. And you can imagine in the future at some point where the idea of a classroom as we know it is gone. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what you think about where we are on that and where we're headed. In a sense, the classrooms seem to create constraints on students that are unnatural and limit the possibilities for what we do and what we can do. But it's clear that students need place, community. They work together, we work together, and place isn't going to go away, but the classroom is dissolving, and I wonder how you think about that.
Thank you, Ben. You probably have better ideas about that than I. The thing that spooks me is we need to make a big change, I think. A couple thousand years of tradition of having a bunch of desks and a chalkboard, or rubbing the white rock on the black rock, and we have a huge investment in that. Go to any university campus, there's classrooms, there's 50-minute periods, there's a temporal pattern and there's a spatial pattern, and breaking out of that is going to be really expensive, and I hope we do it and do it well, because if somebody does it badly and makes a horrible example out of doing it badly, we could poison a very important water hole. So one of the things that I think is going to really ease some constraints is backing off on this notion that you are in school and then you're out of school. And lifelong learning is going to happen no matter how badly we do it. It just, right now, while we were talking here, more stuff was learned than we could possibly all catch up on. So we all have to continuously keep trying to keep up with what we need to know to do what we're doing. So I think the classroom in 100 years will be regarded as an anachronism, but I don't know enough about what it's going to be. So I think we all need to push to make the move away.
Olin's mission is not only to provide an exceptional and innovative educational experience, but also to figure out how to transform education more broadly. That's part of the mission of the college. And clearly, Rick and the staff are doing a wonderful job of providing intellectual leadership for that. I'm curious, as we look to the future of Olin, how you think about what we ought to be doing on the ground to actually be catalysts for change in a much more substantive, hands-on kind of way. How should we be thinking about that, given that you've also teed up the issue that not only is there an imperative for change, but that I think the environment is increasingly the need for change.
And I think Olin is doing a really good job, but I really regard the problem of making sure that it can be transferred as one of the biggest issues. One of the things I'd like to see is more alliance between a place like MIT and Olin, for example, because MIT is, if Ed is successful in creating the new engineering education transformation, that it's happening there will mean that it'll have an immediate big impact, but he's got a whole bunch of constraints that Rick doesn't have. So somewhere in the middle is probably the way you best optimize. And I don't think everybody's going to be Olin. I don't think everybody's going to continue to be whatever the new version of MIT is, or the new version of Purdue Kaplan, or whatever the model is. So I think we should probably go through a period when there's lots of models out there. How many visitors have you had in the last few years to look at this model?
About 750.
Is that the best you can do? Yeah. So a whole bunch of people are watching what Olin is doing and picking up pieces. And I think that rather than blowing up the others and replacing them with Olin clones, it's going to be an infection that spreads. And I think you're probably doing the best that you can. And I hope, I don't think, for example, I think MIT, the reason I'm on the faculty advisory board of MITx, I really want MIT to set a standard for high quality, highly produced, AI augmented, delightful interface training materials so that you can influence billions of people by making it easier and getting that problem out of the classroom and into a coaching environment where one-to-one real education is happening. So I think it's going to be a hybrid, and I congratulate Olin for doing a great job.